This is the Tapped In Podcast, the podcast for beverage distributors that want to empower their sales team to drive business results. Listen up and welcome back to another episode of the Tapped In Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Bud. Welcome back with co-host Mikey. Hi, Mikey. Actually, you are up north again. You have a new background. So where is Mikey in the world right now?
Yeah, so keeping up with Mike. I started my journey yesterday at 4 a.m. in Florida. Flew back to, Atlanta and then Detroit, grabbed the kids, came home, unpacked the suitcases, did a real quick load of laundry, packed our camper, and then decided to hit the road at 8 o'clock last night to make it up to northern Michigan so that we could be here situated for the weekend. So I can work up here all day today, and then we'll start the weekend right off instead of waiting in traffic. So, yeah, quick turnaround, long day, but here we are.
That would have been an incredibly long day. Good stuff. Yeah. Well, speaking of long days, it is ABP season is maybe upon us when this comes out, and those can be some long days around annual business planning with suppliers. And a client, a VXP client said, hey, what would she be thinking about with ABP season and now that we're utilizing VXP and all of that good stuff. So we have a lot of opinions about this.
Yeah, we do. And I'm sure everybody does too.
And people come to this to listen to our opinions. Obviously, that's the sole reason why we're here, not to listen about how you trespass on federal land to place Starlink or anything else out there.
That was public land. That was public land. I was allowed to be there.
We as taxpayers are allowed to be there.
It's national forest, so you're allowed to go and hike and do all the, maybe put your Starlink there for a few days or whatever you want to do with it.
Or maybe not.
Oh, did you lose me? Can you hear me? Just lost the boathouse. Can you hear me now?
Now you're back.
Okay. I saw you the whole entire time, and it still said I was recording and I was uploading. But it was like you just lost everything from me. But yeah, I'm still recording and it still says uploading. So I don't know what happened. That's weird.
Perfect. You're back. We can worry about that later. So Mikey, let's go into some of the core components of what an ABP is. So we've got things like sales targets, distribution targets, projection, sales projections as a whole or financial projections, then incentive planning. Your suppliers are going to talk to you about inventory management, and then hopefully doing some training and market visit planning and any other suppliers in market support plan. So the top is obviously most important. Let's talk about sales targets first. So sales targets, suppliers often always come in with their pie in the sky goal that may or may not be supported with data, that may or may not be supported with reason, and often has an incredible amount of bias placed in it as well. And, the biggest challenge that suppliers have, not to pick on them the whole time, but we'll be picking on them a lot today.
This is kind of their show for the most part, right? Not to be rude, but typically they have a lot of influence in it where they want to be.
Exactly. And they also don't know each individual market as well as we know each individual market, because that's all we spend our time in all day long. So from a sales goal side, top level, where do you see the opportunity and the challenge from ABP planning in general?
Opportunity to see growth, maybe that's outside of what you've recognized, whether it be maybe national trends that you're not seeing or some other data that could help you kind of grow a part of the business that you weren't paying attention to, but also the challenges of, like you said, right? The supplier doesn't know the business or the market as well as we do. And I go back to thinking just when we would sit down and do our ABPs and how much headbutting was going on for the simple fact of, national directives and incentives to be able to hit a certain amount of distribution targets for a brand versus localize where I'm at in my market and how that brand may be performing, and the huge disconnect, which ultimately led to a lot of headbutting.
For sure. It also comes into an element that expectations, if we're meeting or beating expectations on a regular basis, that is something that we, as just people, the psychology of that is positive. I remember working with a supplier who shall remain nameless because we sold them off and fired them, for lack of a better term. And it was 3 ABP seasons in a row. The third one finally broke me. It was like, we're up 60%, we're up 80%, we're up 100%, in succession years, basically doubling the business along the way, almost every year. And it was like, what do you want? I remember hearing the ABP discussion. It was like, we're looking for this. And I'm like, this is never going to happen. And it was like, well, this is what we're expecting. And I'm like, I don't even remember if I like kicked you and Tommy out of the room. It was like, what are you looking for? Like, this is now like a parent-child discussion. And they were like, well, we just need this. And I'm like, you guys don't even have this expectation rooted in reality. Like, you haven't done any research. You haven't done any thought process. You're putting this together. So that is like the number one challenge that suppliers have, bringing these ABP targets to distributors. And it is on balance, the ones that are not doing the research are on balance the smaller ones that don't have the resources.
Or they don't have a good growth plan too. I mean, I think back to exactly what you were just thinking too. And I think some of the goals, long-term goals and visions of some of these smaller suppliers are, hey, I want to be the number 2 in this segment, or I want to be the number in the top 5 in this segment. And they don't really have a good route to get there besides just saying, next year, we need you to hit these numbers. And the next year we need you to hit these numbers, right? We don't have a good plan put in place to how we're going to hit those numbers, but to hold that expectation to us as distributors, without having that sort of that plan, that overall vision. Well, they have the vision, but the roadmap to get there as a supplier, and it's frustrating too, where you just go out and you throw these huge numbers at the wall, hoping to hit them.
Now, where they also do this a lot is in distribution targets and pod targets. And this is something that you spend a lot of time doing, data-backed research. And it's probably almost easier to do data-backed research around pods or the productivity of every individual pod, because sales targets and total like velocity or volume growth, a lot of that is kind of outside of a wholesaler's or the brewer's or supplier's hands. Like, you cannot push a rope. If the product is available, it needs to be picked up off the shelf, put into a shopping cart, scanned out, and paid for. Like, we can't force people to buy stuff. So, but what we can do is we can do reasonable research around points of distribution and the productivity of each point of distribution too, and where we might actually have the most success around expanding pods, or where we have the weakest opportunity to expand pods. And that's something that you spent a lot of time on, that suppliers also came with their own opinions to as well.
Yeah, it was really tricky too, especially in today's market. We're dealing with products that have a longer shelf life than traditional beers, right? It used to be everything was 110 days. So that 90-day buying report for replacements was relevant. But now we're dealing with products that are good for at least a year, sometimes even longer. And when you're still using that 90-day buying report and you're targeting pod growth and distribution off of that, it's super frustrating when you're sitting in our shoes, because we know what's out there. We know our market. And when a supplier walks in and, hey, we need to get our distribution numbers up to this level. Well, guess what? I'm already 3/4 of the way there. It's not showing up on your report. Here's my report. Now it's turning into a rate of sale instead of distribution, right? But also on the other end too, I know where my opportunities are left in the market. I know where that product's not at, and it also probably doesn't belong there. And, as distributors, those are the challenges that we're faced with, because now we're butting heads with our supplier by placing something in an account that we know is not going to sell through in a reasonable amount of time. And we're on the hook for all of the finished product loss costs.
100%. So this is where, for me, a distributor can do a lot of work, and this is an analytical lift around productivity of each individual pod or types of pods. So like product categories. So like we would do this with, like, we've heard from in this podcast around like Voodoo Ranger 19.2s or just 19.2s in general, or the RTD category. And is it a 4-pack pod or a single pod, and the productivity of each one of those and what made the most sense in each category of store. And then you can get more sophisticated around what is going to actually move the needle. Because to me, if a distributor gets a goal of adding, 100 points of distribution throughout the year, which ones are the most productive for us matters more than the general number. Because it's like the worst case scenario for a supplier to get 100 of the worst pod placements. And I think this is something that suppliers can actually, especially if they're big and they have, or reasonably sized, and they have a handful of wholesalers, they can bring that knowledge and should be bringing that knowledge to their network of saying, hey, here's where our points of distribution are most productive. This is the style type category of store that does the best, top to bottom. And that we want to have the deepest penetration in the stores that are doing the best and the weakest penetration in the stores that are doing the worst. Because then what happens organically is that if that product is turning more and more and more at the most productive, then that's going to slowly waterfall down to the other categories because the brand is growing and moving. We just have to be more logical about it. There's a really smart supplier in the Northeast that is a small craft supplier. And when they move to a new market, it's like, and we have a couple of our wholesalers up there that have this brand. When they move to a new market, they target their primary draft and craft supplier. So they target, we want to know the top 10 or 20 draft accounts in your market that have the best like turn rate of sale, where these types of beers are the most productive. And those are the ones that we want to be in. And that's all we really care about. And we'll start there.
Yeah.
And as we go there and it does well there, they know we will organically grow. And what happens with pods is like people want to be an inch deep and a mile wide, when it actually is the most productive to be an inch wide and a mile deep, and you're going to get more productivity out of it. So that would be my push back for distributors to say, hey, I want to know where are the most productive pods, what type of accounts, all that good stuff.
Yeah, because we all have reps that all have accounts that can just take everything, right? We all have those. Okay, well, we need 5 placements of this. Yep, I know where to put it. And those are the accounts that it doesn't really make sense. I think back to our market, and exactly the off-premise and the on-premise accounts that I'm talking about. When if we really needed to throw some numbers on the wall to make somebody else happy, I guess, a supplier, maybe we were on that shit list for way too long, and we just needed to get off of it for a minute. We needed to go grab a couple placements. We knew exactly where those accounts were, that they didn't really care what you brought in. And, it noticed, you can see it in the account because every supplier had every SKU that maybe ever came out in there. But those are the accounts that just doesn't make sense. So now what are we doing? What's your famous line? Now we're doing activities for activity's sake. Now we are just going out and getting placements to make somebody else happy. That it really doesn't make any sense for us as a company or for our business, and definitely not our bottom line.
The next piece that a supplier and wholesaler need to be talking about more regularly is the financial contribution of a supplier's of the partnership to the wholesaler. I am seeing our largest supplier partners doing this more and more, and specifically talking about gross profit. And if you're a supplier listening to this, and if you're a distributor listening to this, ranking suppliers by volume is something we tend to classically do. Start ranking suppliers by GP and just gross profitability dollars. And you will see some interesting adjustments from probably rank 5 to rank 20 or 30, depending on how many you have and how those things hop around. And I became mm, almost exclusively focused to a fault because, Greg was so focused on volume, and I had
Mm-hmm.
to swing the other way to balance the pendulum out and solely focus on dollars. And it was just like, hey, this is just what I care about. But what it allowed us to do is really understand where we wanted to drive focus and what was actually mattering, and things that we've talked about on the podcast before, like Fireball Malt, that is incredibly profitable, but from a total volumetric standpoint, when we're selling, Anheuser-Busch and Bud Light and Michelob Ultra, very, very low volume and
Yeah.
velocity. But the profitability is so big, it's like it actually jumps from like 10 or 15 to like 2 or 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
And like we want to know what that is as a wholesaler's perspective to understand, and we want to talk about it from a supplier's perspective, because that's a way to get into the hearts and minds of a wholesaler, because that's how they're paying the bills, that's how they're paying for their people, that's how they're making their money too. So avoiding that conversation is like avoid at your own risk from a supplier's perspective, and it should be something we are constantly talking about with our wholesaler partners if you're coming at this from a supplier side, for sure.
Yeah, because that's what makes the most sense for the business. That's what's driving the bottom line. And like you said, when you start focusing on some of those suppliers and you notice them, maybe they weren't even in the top 10 as far as volume, but now they make a whole lot more sense, and they are very important. And you're moving the needle on the dollar side a heck of a lot faster with those suppliers. So even now, when we watch clients that we have that have been with VXP for maybe 6 months or less, right? So still kind of new, but kind of getting used to it, and to watch where their focus when we look at our supplier dashboard and how everybody's performing. Watch their focus from not so much the volume side of things, but also the profitability side of things. To watch that come in, and watch that in real time, kind of their eyes open, and oh yeah, now we're paying attention to maybe this number 8 and this number 9 down here that we really didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to before they were there. We did what we needed to, but now what else can I do to push the needle on them? How, if I got them up to number 7, I mean, that's going to be huge. And then also just watching the profitability side on the supplier. So even we measure everything, GP per CE. So watching that go up and down too, and identifying when you're actually losing margin, or and you're losing a couple pennies on every case, and then you're like, all right, something's going on here. What's going on? And that's when you dig even deeper into the portfolio to find out where that dollar is coming from, or where those pennies are coming from, and identify that as well. So you do get a lot more focus when you look to the dollar side than the volume side.
Yep. Next piece is incentive planning. So, how does a supplier want to get involved in the setup incentive programs that are available at the wholesaler? And from a supplier perspective, what we want to try to think about is how do we utilize the dollars? My advice, sitting in the wholesaler side from an incentive planning for a supplier, is come with a bucket of money. Just what are my resources that I'm able or that I choose to allocate to this wholesaler, and work with the wholesaler to design out a plan to do that. Good programs are like, how often can you be on the incentive plan? Wholesalers have lots and lots of challenges around creating a plan and also organizing the plan and managing it, because people can only focus on so many things. And
Mm-hmm.
if there's hundreds and hundreds of things, then you can get lost in the shuffle. So for me, and when I look at it from a distributor perspective, once you have that bucket of money, you have to weigh all the pros and cons and weigh out where does a supplier sit in the hierarchy of, my hierarchy of my brands that I represent. Are they a fast growth? Are they trying to get back to growth? Is this something that is on the downward spiral or downward slide where maybe I need to harness away attention from this brand? These are all things that we have to make tough decisions from time to time. We don't like to talk about these things, but you have to be protective of your sales team as a wholesaler operator from the attention and
Yeah.
the distraction and the creativity of it. And I would even propose some workarounds to manage some of it. One of the examples that I would think about is if I have a bucket of money and I have a supplier who wants to run a giant pod plan, which I don't have a lot of confidence in as this wholesaler, you should peel off a proportion of that pod plan for FPL. and to buy back or to eat that FPL cost out of that incentive planning. So maybe if it's $5,000, 2,500 goes to the reps, 2,500 gets saved in reserve to peel back off if the pod plan doesn't work out right. If it does work great, then you use the second bucket to redo it or to expand it in some way. But we have to have these logical discussions with the suppliers and organize it in a way that is financially benefit for the wholesaler and the sales team and financially benefit for the supplier at the end of the day too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Just challenges. Like it's just a hard thing. Last couple things.
I
Go ahead,
think
Mikey.
too, just an analogy of what you were just saying there too. It's like you're a firefighter and you show up to this giant structure fire and every single floor and every single room's on fire. You almost, instead of spraying water in one room and putting that fire out and then working to the next, you almost throw your hands up and you say, let the damn thing burn down, right? A lot of things with a lot of same thought with your incentives. And if you have all these incentives and objectives and you're throwing every single thing that your suppliers want you to at your sales reps, all of a sudden they're just going to get that kind of same shutdown, right? Where it's like, oh my God, I don't even know where to tackle half of these. I'm just going to shut down. So yeah, it goes back to what's important for you and your business first and foremost.
Yeah. Most talented individuals can handle probably 10 things at a given time and manage and strategize. And those are our most talented individuals. So we want to start to think about how can I maximize the maybe mean or even on the bottom quartile of that. So it's probably more closer to 3 to 5 is our core sales rep that can handle and juggle things on a regular basis. And I would rather have 3 to 5 incredible incentives or objectives that are crushing it than have 10 half-ass. It's the Ron Swanson, or rather whole-ass one thing than half-ass a dozen things.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Especially lately when you see some of these incentive plans and it's not even a handful that you wrap your head around in it, but it's multiple pages of a spreadsheet. And it's like, where do you even start on any of this?
Yeah, where do you even get going? Where do you begin and all that good stuff?
As a sales rep, you can't even memorize all of those incentives to know what you need to focus on when you're in the account.
Yep. A couple more things to touch on. Pretty light inventory management. This is a good time for a wholesaler to bring up any kind of inventory challenges. Did you get product long or close dated that we need to clean that up or reject those loads and bring that back up? If you're a supplier, you want to be thinking about days of inventory. Is the wholesaler having the days of inventory? There are typically two types of wholesalers in a days of inventory camp. There are those wholesalers that thou shall not be out of stock. And there are those wholesalers that are run more by a CFO, and it's talking about inventory turns, and we're talking about return on capital, and we're keeping incredibly low DOI. So the opportunity there from a supplier and a wholesaler side from an ABP is if you are having an out of stock issue, you can talk about gross profit because you're already talking about it, and maybe lost gross profit due to low stock or out of stocks. And if you're thou shall not be out of stock, you should be thinking about, am I having an FPL issue? And really having that discussion with your senior leadership and your owners around like, hey, there is a cost to being. And you remember me talking about that. I think that, it was my education in supply chain. It was the cost of being going from 96% fulfillment rate to 100% fulfillment rate is just too expensive. Mm-hmm. There's too much cost to that. And it was something that we worked really hard at Atlas to lower that, cost of carrying that extra inventory in a way that we were maximizing every case we were sold and maximizing every case we may or may not have lost in sales as well. Because we did. Like that's always going to happen. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, especially with states that do discounting too, right? When not only now are you long on this product and you probably have an FPL risk, but now you're also, discounting and cutting your profits in half to just get rid of it because you were a little long.
Mm-hmm. And those numbers may be casual. Those numbers are probably casual, a little armchair expert. But if you look at your fulfillment rate, and if it is close to 100 or like just a few percentage points below 100, you probably have a larger FPL problem than you think you do. And if it's running like 97 to 96, you're probably in a better sweet spot when it comes to FPL, and you're probably also not losing too many dollars to out of stocks either. Last big pieces then too, and this is back in the attention camp, is supplier training, market visits, and in-market support. So like, let's put this in a couple buckets. So like in the market with the sales team, this is seeking or pulling attention away from the sales team's day-to-day activities. So this is where you as a distributor want to be very protective around the sales team's time and attention, and making sure that they are focused on the right stuff when they're supposed to be. The other thing that we all have noticed, and this is something that a lot of people have worked around with, like focus days, maybe on a Friday, or with a team lead, we're not sending a supplier rep all day long with one rep, because that's unproductive for everybody. And it just kind of is what it is. But the other thing I hate about market visits is the milk runs, like creating this manufactured reality. And to me, this has been a pet peeve of mine for a while, because creating the milk runs or the manufactured reality that's what the supplier comes to believe. And if that's what they come to believe, then that's the expectation they set. And if that's the expectation they have, and that they set, that you helped kind of build from a wholesaler perspective, then that's what they are going to ask you for over and over again. So in this weird kind of way as an industry, and this is a challenge to the wholesalers from an industry perspective, when we create the milk run, then that builds the expectation. And then the feedback loop comes back to us in an ABP, that then we asked to have that as an expectation. And we're like, but that's not the reality. It's like, well, have you took anybody to a shitty store in a while? To an underperforming store where like maybe you don't have your stuff together, and like maybe the store it doesn't have their stuff together, or maybe you have a more challenging relationship with that retailer, or maybe you can't get everything done that the supplier wants. Like, have you dropped by one of those stores with that supplier rep in a while? Because I'm pretty sure the answer is no.
Yeah. We would do that with with our largest supplier, with AB, right? I mean, our large volume accounts were large volume accounts. They weren't good accounts by any means. And when we'd go visit our top 5 or top 10 accounts, every time we got a new district manager, we'd walk in there. So this is in your top 5? Yeah, absolutely. They sell a lot of beer. It's all 25 ounce, but they sell a lot of beer. You know, it's all sub premium. And you couldn't paint a better picture of what our market was by then. You know, our top 5, especially with other suppliers, and new suppliers would come in and, hey, I want to go to your top 5 bars today, and look for draft opportunities. All right, perfect, let's do it. At the end of the day, they're like, wow, really? Those are your top? Yeah, they just sell a lot of beer. They give it away. It's just like one of those bars from last week's episode where they have 4 taps and they're all light beer, but they give it away for next to nothing, and people are in there at 7:30 in the morning all the way until they close at 2 a.m. So yeah,
And they're
you want to paint the picture of what your reality, what your market really is, to your suppliers, especially ABP season.
And we should be okay with having a bell curve. There's always going to be a bell curve of, here's a top performing account where we're kicking on all cylinders. Here's a middle of the road account where we're kind of doing what we need to do, and they're trying to figure out some stuff, or we're trying to figure out some stuff, or the consumer may be shifting inside the store. Those are things like, not everything is in our complete control out at retail. And here's some underperforming stores. And like, we should be okay with talking about, maybe this is my willingness to have some confrontation around it. Like, we should be okay as a wholesaler saying, like, we're not on balance, like, right, we're not doing our best here. And, these are the challenges that we're having, and these are the roadblocks that we've been meeting, and we're not hitting it all. And we should be okay with that too. Like, not everything is going to be perfect. Right. If we say that everything is perfect, then we think that it is perfect, and then we get pissed when it looks differently.
Yeah. Yep. And whoever's with you is going to find something that's not perfect, right? That's kind of their job. So when you go out, you say, I'm taking you to my perfect accounts, and they're still not perfect. that also doesn't paint a great picture for the supplier side either.
So then that kind of summarizes like the core business plan components for an ABP. Now, what comes out of this is an ultimate plan. What's a sales plan? What's a pod plan? What's our incentive plan? What's our productivity? What's our in market plan? All this stuff. So once we bundle all this up, Mikey, what are the opportunities and risks of an actually implementing it the following year, or implementing it? Because a lot of people are like, get a fast start. Let's start the ABP in like Q4. And like, I mean, like, what are the challenges with implementing it with the sales team and with the business after that?
Yeah, like you just said too, implementing it earlier, you're kicking it off early. You're sitting down and do your next year's planning in October. You don't even know how the year shook out yet. I mean, if anything, we've learned in the last 18 months is that a lot can happen in this industry real fast that makes some huge swings. So I think dynamic planning is also a really good thing to be open to, right? If we're going to set our final or following year's plan in October without even knowing how the year ended, we better be able to have some flexibility to make some changes if we need to see what happened. But also, I mean, huge risks there is if we're sitting down and we're allowing our suppliers to set our numbers, set our targets for distribution, sales targets, volume targets, and we're not pushing back, or even if we did push back and we didn't win, now we take those numbers and we're rolling those into a company goal of where we think that we are going to be as a company, or where we want to be. Maybe we know we can't get there, but that's where we want to be. That's kind of our false hope, right? Like, yeah, everybody wants to go back to growth. Everybody would love to be growing 10%, but is that reality? Most cases it's not right now. So when we allow our suppliers to set those targets and we roll with them as a company, now we're setting ourselves up for failure. We really don't have any measurable results that we can actually hold ourselves accountable for, because we've already made these gigantic stretch goals. And everybody listening to this right now knows that supplier, sometimes where they land and where we land and we know where we can actually get, there's a big gap there. And then, another risk too is now we've set our company goals that basically were our supplier goals, but now they're our company goals. And now we're holding our reps accountable for them, not only on them about trying to get these results, but also their pay is tied to that. So now, we have goals that we know we probably can't get to, but we really want to get to them. So now we're holding everybody and their pay accountable to get there. So some big downside, a lot of risks. Positive sides is that, hey, I'm sitting down with my supplier. I kind of know where they're going. I can see their insights. I can see their aspiration, where they want to be, right? What their final goal is. And maybe I am missing a little bit of opportunity here too, but there has to be that equal pushback. It has to be like, hey, if I know I can't get there, I don't want to agree to it. And if I have to agree to it on your system and put those numbers into your system because I don't have the flexibility. I mean, we used to always say, well, what's our bottom line, right? Our line was cut the bullshit. How much flexibility do we have in these numbers? Because we already know where we are targeting, where we want to be. And that was also trying to be realistic, because when you're setting yourself up for unrealistic goals, you're setting yourself up for failure. And if we have to walk away from that planning meeting knowing that my supplier's goals do not meet my company goals, that's okay too, right? Because now we know that we have obtainable goals that if we get there, it's going to be amazing. And we know that we can get there if we follow our roadmap, instead of just coming out with a 20-30% stretch goal of where we'd love to be, but probably realistic, you can't get there.
Yeah. I kind of carried the weight of putting together the financial plan for the P&L at our operation. And to me, it was always what are we going to take as considerations from the supplier ABPs and bring it into thought process around the P&L planning, and then which ultimately became the sales plan for our team. The challenge, though, is if you take it at gospel, to Mike's point, if you take it at gospel and you push it out to the sales team, you have a disassociated goal with what you as leadership think is going to happen that is tied to somebody else's outcomes. And to me, that's just a recipe for disaster. And it's a recipe for challenges and problems. And you want to ask yourself, like, are you willing to tie your bonus to this goal from a leadership perspective? if you're willing to tie your bonus to this goal, then it's probably a good goal. If you're not willing to, then it probably should be remanaged and adjusted. And every single one of the clients that we work with professionally is bringing their own thoughts to bear and bringing their own process to bear around setting goals and taking supplier expectations and taking supplier targets and actually implementing them into the actual sales team in a way that is dynamic, that is transferable, that is rooted in reality, and that will actually drive results too. The other thing that clients are starting to do too with the kind of functionality around objectives and incentives is they're taking the silent hand profitability stuff that we work with. And I say silent hand, like when the two of us or when another leader isn't telling a rep what to do, they're doing what's smart on their own. And they're bringing in objectives and incentives to actually reinforce what is working and to push that to the rest of the team and move the needle faster. So there are ways that we can use various tools and designs and incentive programs that are to get incremental effort and to get that discretionary effort out of the sales team and be smart about it. So take them into consideration, I think, is the highlight of this piece, but don't take them for gospel and don't push them right to the sales team with no plan in sight other than just saying, yes, I'm happy with taking this goal supplier and moving on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And typically we all have a dollar goal in mind, right, for our final year or for our following year of where we want to be as a company for dollars. Also, I mean, we all know how to calculate our gross profit per CE. Every route accounting system has a measure for it. Reverse engineer that. If I need to get to this X amount of dollars next year in a total year, how many cases do I need to get there? And calculate that by using your GP per CE, where it's at right now, your rate of change, kind of where it's heading, and you can calculate that. And then, like, oh, wow, we need to really, if this is the dollar goal that we have for next year, we really need to step up our game and either grow GP per CE or this is the volume that we need to get to. So sometimes by reverse engineering it too, you can maybe you can identify that, hey, this is not obtainable. Maybe we are stretching a little bit too far than what we really thought to. Or, hey, if we need to get to this dollar figure, maybe that's when we start to look outside, like what other brands can we pick up? What other suppliers maybe we can bring in to help us get there? So instead of just relying on our volume.
And it's a good sniff test. When we do this regularly, it's the way that I chose to do it. And it's probably it's the Bud method. It's very back of the envelope calculation, but it is, what is our volume goal? What is our profitability goal? What's that GP per CE calculation look like? Because it helps me triangulate where we're going to be or where might that objective be. And is it 10 cents higher? Is it 20 cents higher? Is it 50 cents higher? I saw an initial budget from a client, they had some market adjustments and some changes, and they readjusted their budget expectations, and then they shared it with us. And I was just like, are we going to hit this? It's like 60 cents higher than what we have been year to date. And we're already growing like in the mid 20s to 30s. So are we going to get 90 cents out of it this year? And it was like a realization for everybody in the room of like, that's probably a little aggressive, isn't it? And I'm like, okay, so we got options then. If we think it's too aggressive, we either lower the profitability expectations, that'll shrink down the GP per CE, or we can raise the volume expectations. But if we don't think the volume expectations are going to happen, then the culprit is that GP target. And we got to move that number back down to hit some kind of reasonable growth plan.
Yeah. Yep. And if you're not reasonably setting targets, you're just going to make yourself frustrated over and over and over again. And you're just going to deflate yourself because you're always going to be chasing that number.
Yep. Couple other pieces for any suppliers listening and, distributors, you guys can use this to your advantage too, is we want to be focused. We want to be thinking about how to pitch product launches and innovations. If you're launching the 12th T to go combat the $1 billion gorilla of Twisted, you're going to have pushback, and you've got to find a reason why rather than a me too. And if you're a distributor listening to the 12th pitch of a T, you've got to pick a horse, and you can't have 12 T's running around in the warehouse and expecting to get any focus or any momentum out of it. So it's just a difficult thing. But the reality is like we have to be able to have this conversation around like, I can't have a 12T, bro. Like, I don't need it. We already have Twisted, or it's tough for us to get and beat Twisted as somebody who didn't have as we operated a wholesaler with no Sam Adams and no Twisted. Like, it was just tough to tackle that behemoth, and it hasn't slowed down, and it's not going to slow down. And all the T's in the world wouldn't cut that gorilla. Like, gorillas don't care about paper cuts.
And there's not a lot of space for that category. There's really not. When there's a runaway leader, clear cut leader like that, there's no need for the additional space. You're not going to get a whole T door unless you're dealing with an account that's 50 doors, but there's not that space to have 12 T's in your warehouse looking for space at every account.
The other piece that is really powerful from a supplier's perspective, and the distributor should be pushing back and pushing the suppliers to have a more organized plan around this, is the chain sales plan and chain execution. As chains become more and more and more of a part of the business, and in certain markets they're huge, it's like the whole game, then those suppliers need to have a plan for executing in chains, growing and managing that relationship, getting on key weeks for features and displays, getting into those the buckets for promotions. And that's something that a supplier has an incredible amount of control over, and that your average distributor basically has no control over, from the design of getting in the sets and getting pricing. Now, more and more of the chains are moving back in a direction of that we have some flexibility with display space. So those are the things that the distributors can take over and can manage at a local level. For sure, we can do something. It's probably less than an independent account. But you as a distributor need to be holding their feet to the fire as a supplier. Like, what is your chain execution plan, and what does that look like? And the final thing I'd bring up too is kind of like the financial health of a supplier would be something I'd be talking about with all of our suppliers right now. We've had a series of challenges around some bankruptcy of some big brands over the last few years. I don't think we're done seeing that. And, they want to see the financial investment and resources from our side on a regular basis. We should be turning the corner and actually saying, hey, this is what I want to understand from your financial perspective too, as a supplier as well. Because these brands they're co-investments. We own brand investment as a wholesaler as much as the supplier does. And if you're a financially healthy partner, and if it is an actual partnership that we like to talk about, we should be willing to have these discussions and actually talk about the financial health of each other's businesses. And to me, it's like usually a one-way street where distributors are being asked about their financial health, and it should be a two-way street where I want to know about a supplier's financial health. We actually sold some suppliers, Mikey, in the kind of like 2010, 2011. We kind of peeled back like a fair amount of suppliers that are in the craft game. And we did that with intention.
Yeah.
Because we didn't see a future for that crew as a long-term market player for where we thought the category was going. And we got lucky. We made some really good decisions and some really good thought processes around one of them. If anybody wants to know about the best deal that I ever cut, grab me at an event and I will tell you all about the incredible deal we cut on the back end of that. And it was wild. But you do need to think about this. And I've said this a couple of times. You do need to think about yourself as you're kind of like an agent, and you're representing talent in your market. Your talent isn't like an agent in Hollywood where you're selling people to do movies and this and that. Your talent, you're an agent of beverages and what is available and what is hot and what is moving and what is weak and what is moving on should be being deprioritized and potentially being sold off to somebody else who could prioritize it better. And I think we should be thinking about that as an industry more often, because every supplier has a home. It just might not be in ours specifically. And that's what we came to realize, is that not every supplier has a home at Atlas. and it didn't make sense for us to have these brands. So we moved them off to other things.
Yeah, we push our reps so hard to make sure that what's in those accounts makes sense for the account and it's moving, right? Talking about velocity, and if it's just taking up shelf space and it's really not doing any good and it's not getting the turns that it needs to, maybe we're incurring some costs through FPL, then why is it there? And it's the same thing with our portfolio. It's the same thing with our warehouses. And we've turned a huge page in the last 8 to 10 years where we went from walking into suppliers, breweries, having conversations with them, wanting to represent their brands, going out and looking for future brands to bring in and having that game plan. We went from that to people knocking down our door. Hey, will you carry our brand, right? So the tables have really changed. Now we are a lot more pickier. We pick and choose who we want to represent, who we're going to make the investment in. But it's also really smart to take a look and see what's in your portfolio right now, what's not pulling its weight. Do I need to have it? Is it worth it? Is it worth the cost of the inventory, shipping? Maybe you have to go pick it up. Maybe it's pretty local and you drive over to pick it up. And are you getting the rate of sales out of it, out of your investment? And taking a look at that, I mean, we had one supplier in particular that it was kind of on the iffy page for me for a while. We were kind of looking at it, and then all of a sudden we had found out some insight that somebody was leaving the brewery, and the person that was leaving the brewery was basically what the brewery was built on. And without that person, that individual there, the brand was really left with nothing. So I remember you and I had that conversation like, hey man, I think this is coming up. I've heard this just happened. We need to really take a look and see, about possibly moving this brand on before we lose all the sales, before this kind of goes down. And I didn't think it would go as far down as it did. They ended up closing, maybe 3 to 4 years later. But yeah, even initially the sales loss was incredible. And then, it eventually took them down to nothing.
Yeah. These are all things we should be thinking about. This episode is rooted in a lot of theory, some in reality. And at the end of the day, when we're doing ABP season, we have to be comfortable with some confrontation on both sides. There's going to be some confrontation on what do I need as a wholesaler? What do I need as a supplier? Where do we align? And kind of the parting note is that we often align with our supplier partners as distributors like 95% of the time. And we forget that it's usually that high. But we choose to focus on the 5% that we don't. And anecdotally, for anybody listening who's married, if you focus on the 95% of your happy, healthy marriage, you're probably going to stay happily, healthy marriage. And if you focus on the 5% that you disagree with, you're probably going to get a divorce, or you're probably going to have a challenging marriage long term. And I used to tell this to suppliers when they used to get frustrated with how we were approaching some things. It's like, well, we focus on the 5, the 95 will go away. But if we focus on the 95, the 5 won't matter. Mm-hmm. And if we move in that direction long term, we're going to get what we want out of each other. And I would rather have 95% of what I want and not worry about the 5 than do it in reverse. It just seems like a better way to live, right, Mikey?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, be happy, right?
Then you feel comfortable putting your Starlink on federal land and trespassing all you want, and it doesn't matter.
I literally, I'm not even 24 hours out of island life, so everything is fine, man. No worries. Everything is fine.
Well, I think that does it for another episode of the Tapped In Sales Podcast. Mikey, thanks for joining us and being you. And cheers, everybody. We'll talk soon.
Cheers.